Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining me again for another nature journaling activity. As always, I want to start by talking about our materials. So I'm going to use these Derwent Inktense Paint Pan travel sets because they're super easy to use. They come with this little water brush so that you don't need a water cup. That just screws right off there and you put your water in there. I like to use Winsor & Newton cold press watercolor paper. I really like this paper because it has a slight texture, but it's still pretty smooth, so it's very friendly for beginners. This tutorial is part of my invasive species collection, and in this one we're going to focus on English ivy. So feel free to take a screenshot of this image, or you can use your own. To begin, we're just going to start sketching our English ivy. The leaves on this vine can be identified because of their pointed lobes and their really light colored veins. So I'm going to begin by just sketching out the shapes of the leaves and marking where those veins are. As you're sketching your leaves, you might recognize this plant because it is commonly seen in our own backyards. Unfortunately, English ivy has started to move out of our backyards and into wild spaces, which is why it might be added to the list of invasive species. That's why it's important to be able to identify this vine, because if it is in your yard, then perhaps you can make sure that it doesn't go beyond your own backyard, or you could remove it and replace it with a native species. So now that you're done sketching, we're going to start painting. And as always with watercolor, you want to wet your paper first so that your pigment can bleed out organically. You also want to make sure to leave all those light colored veins white, so don't get any water in those areas so that they can stay the bright white color of the paper. For this painting, I'm going to focus on that large leaf in the center first. So I'm just going to start by adding yellows, greens, and blues and mixing them together to achieve that deep green that we see in English ivy leaves. As with all nature journaling activities, make sure to keep this really relaxing and fun. Don't get too caught up in all the details. Don't worry if you ruin your painting a little bit. No worries. This is just about learning to identify this plant so that when you're on your next hike, you'll actually notice it. So once all your leaves are painted, you're gonna let that dry, and then we're just gonna add in some details to really call out the shape of the leaves. So I'm gonna really define my pointed lobed edges there. And then after this, I'm gonna end up adding my stem. So I'm actually painting English ivy that I saw on a hike while I was at Parker Woods, which is a nature preserve in Northside, which is in Cincinnati, Ohio. Again, while this species is not considered to be invasive in Ohio quite yet, it is on a list of species that need to be assessed. Okay, so once you're all finished, you always want to add all your details from your nature journaling activity so that you can remember what you actually painted. And then I always like to put the colors that I used just so that I can remember those for future paintings. And that's it. Thank you so much for painting with me. Please share questions and comments below, as well as any information that you can about invasive species in your own community. Thanks so much. Happy painting and get outside. Bye guys. Thanks.